Welcome, everybody, to the final presentation of the day. We're going to talk about the biggest and best transit system you don't know and give you an overview. And so I'm going to run through the presentation. Go ahead and put questions in the chat. I will get to as many of them as I can afterwards. So here we go. This is me. I'm David Klahr. I'm an independent consultant based in the Washington, D.C. area. These are the various ways to reach me. Add me on Twitter, add me on LinkedIn, and I'll follow you back. So we're going to talk about a really interesting government jurisdiction called the Reedy Creek Improvement District. And it's about 40 square miles in 2 counties in Florida. And it was created in the mid-'60s under a small subsection of the Florida statutes having to do with drainage and water control entities. So it's technically a flood control entity. But the thing is, under Florida law, Reedy Creek can set taxes and zoning and do local laws and have all kinds of interesting local powers. It's basically the local government. It does have a small number of elected representatives, but the elected representatives are chosen by the landowners. And there's only one landowner, the Walt Disney Company. So you know it better as Disney World. It is big, way bigger than you're probably thinking. It is basically a city. It self-governs. It has real powers, just like Philadelphia does. 50 million visitors a year pre-COVID. That is the same as New York City. And the transit fleet they use to manage this operation is one of the 50 largest in the country. So you're probably wondering, why did Florida allow the Walt Disney Company to set up their own government in the middle of the city? Well, the short answer is this version of Disneyland. And there were a lot of different cities that were under consideration. But Florida was kind of where they were going because of the weather and because at that time freeways were starting to intersect in new ways. But what most people don't know is that Walt Disney himself actually planned to build a city, like a real city you would live in, with 20,000 residents, and he called it Epcot, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. You know, when you look at old footage of all the old 1939 World's Fair, and they've got these towers in a park surrounded by all this exotic transportation, he wanted to do that in real life. And what's interesting about Epcot is that it would not be called there would be concentric neighborhoods around a core downtown with offices, and people would take trains and buses and ferries and other things to get there. And so he could use the city as a lab for not just new forms of zoning, but new forms of governance. But they never did that for a couple of reasons. One is that Walt died before the Florida operation was up and running. He basically presented it, they approved it legally, and then he died. And so the company basically thought, you know, Walt really wanted this. We're not sure we really want to do this. And it wasn't as easy to build the theme parks as they thought. So no one actually lives at Disney World. It's just been the theme parks have expanded. So bus is an important core of their transportation system. How many buses are we talking about? So basically, it's the 42nd largest bus fleet in the country. It's really hard to get information about Disney because it's 100% private and proprietary. So they're not going to tell you the real number. But there's a lot of different sources you can go to kind of figure it out. So as far as we can tell, it's somewhere in the mid-400s, which puts the fleet somewhere between San Jose and Austin, which are the 10th and 11th largest cities in the country. That's how big just the bus fleet is. Two minor parks, a central shopping and entertainment hub, an intermodal transit hub, which is the 4th largest parking lot in the world, and 31 different resort hotels and timeshare complexes. There's a lot going on there. And they want to offer a car-free experience for guests, and that starts when you get off the plane. So if you land in Orlando right now, you can get picked up by their proprietary coach system, the Magical Express. Takes you from the airport straight to your hotel. It's free. That's going to be phased out in a couple of years because the Brightline commuter rail system is going to be building a Disney station. And there'll also be a station at the airport. So the idea is that you will have a one-seat ride once the system is fully built out from as far away as Miami and Tampa directly to the Disney campus where their own transit system can take over. There's no reason to take a car to the Disney campus. And the map on the right is a fan map. It's actually a little bit out of date, but it shows you the complexity and range of the system. So what do they have? They've got buses to every theme park, every hotel, and Disney Springs, which is their downtown shopping area. There's a monorail train to 2 parks and 3 hotels. They have a gondola system to 6 hotels and 2 parks. They've got ferries. They have their own branded lift vehicles called mini vans, M-I-N-N-I-E, like Minnie Mouse. They have polka dots and ears on them. They have BRT lanes. It's their property and their roads. They can do whatever they want. They decided to put in BRT lanes, and they charge a parking fee everywhere, and it's pretty high because they don't want you to drive. They want you to stay on campus. They want you to spend money there, and they want you to take transit everywhere that you go. If you're an employee, what they refer to as a cast member, there's also all kinds of networks and shuttles to take you everywhere on campus that you need to go. They have about 70,000 cast members. That's a lot. It's basically the largest employer in Florida by far. And they have a residential college program where basically you do an internship at Disney, learning various aspects of the business, and that also provides you with housing and buses to take you everywhere you need to go. They don't release any official figures, so everything you have to figure out from the outside, but luckily there are extremely devoted Disney superfans who really analyze this to like an extreme degree, just like you guys are really into trains, they're really into Disney and get the same level of scrutiny. So here's what we do know. We know that there's about a 20-minute headway on bus routes. That's real good. We think there's about 100 to 125,000 riders a day, and we know that about 250,000 people a day go to the theme parks. We know that monorail rides, it's as big a system as Miami Metro Rail, and it's double the size of the Patco Speed Line, twice as many passengers on a daily basis. We know that system-wide at Disney, they're doing somewhere between 80 and 90 million rides a day. That's about as big as SEPTA. It's not that far off. It's not including regional rail, but it would include things like Broad Street Line, Frankfurt Market, et cetera, and they have 2,200 people whose job it is just to drive the buses and the trains and move every people where they need to go. So again, in terms of relative ridership, who are they as bigger than? They're bigger than Miami. They're bigger than Honolulu. They're bigger than Baltimore. They're bigger than MARTA. They're bigger than Pittsburgh. It's basically a huge city, and none of this is run by Orlando or Orange County. This is entirely 100% funded by Disney, proprietary to them. So why should we care about all this? I mean, it's fun for trivia night, but I think this raises kind of some larger points that I'd like to lead into a discussion. One is that a lot of us talk about how do we get people to make car-free trips. Well, not only are millions of people making car-free trips there, they're paying a lot of money to do it. They really want to do it, and they're spending a fortune on it. And for millions of Americans, it's their only transit experience. They would never ride a bus or a train at home, but they absolutely will do it at Disney World. And their interaction with that system, it's very efficient and very effective, and it really moves them where they need to go in a good way. From my perspective, it's really interesting how they show a model that this is not a government subsidy operation. This is extracting their own local wealth to provide necessary business operations. They don't need all those extra cars on campus. It causes problems for them just as the same it causes problems for a city. So they're not begging for dollars from the federal government. They're not relying on Secretary Pete to fix this problem for them. They figure out a way that the local employer really needs to move people around, and they're going to pay for it. And the way it works, it's a hub and spoke system. So buses are networked going and aligned to each theme park. And so each of the different hotels has a line direct to the theme park. It's not a grid. And that's not a match for a 19th or 20th century city. It's actually more like an airline, but it resembles the development that we're seeing in newer places in the 21st century. So I think there's a lot to be seen in how they structure the experience and how you switch buses and trains to get to where you're going. I do want to give a very special thanks to, I had a research assistant for this, Nadia Kudasheva, who I met at Transportation Camp DC during the first version of this. She revealed to me she was a former Disney cast member at Disney World and gave me just tremendous assistance, answering questions, editing the presentation, just figuring out how stuff put together in a way that I just couldn't get as an outsider. She currently works at Sharp & Company in Maryland, and she has just been a huge help. I want to make sure I acknowledge her in this presentation.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. That's pretty much it. That's all I got. And now I want to just open it to all of you, and let's talk about Disney World and what we can learn from this really amazing operation.
Could you say the percentage again of the workers who use the buses and the trains versus how many total workers there were? That's a key percentage, if you ask me.
That's proprietary to Disney. I would say, based on what we're able to determine, it's going to be significant, but an actual number, I don't have access to that. I think that's something they keep close to the vest. But I know that they do encourage workers in the campus system.
I had a friend who worked maintenance at Disney, and he said that in order to get into the park as a worker, you had to take their transportation system because there was only remote parking at the edge of the park complex. Once you went into their grounds, you were on their transportation system somehow.
I can speak to that. Various complexes, including the 4 theme parks and certain clumps of hotels, are very large. So there is remote cast member parking that is adjacent to these places. And then your friend is right that there are internal buses that will get you to the right place within the park. So for instance, Epcot, the park, there is a cast member parking lot. And after you pass through security and your employee check-in, you can board the internal bus, which goes around the perimeter and will get you to the right place of the park, because if you wanted to walk that, it would genuinely take you like over a half hour from one end to another.
So the follow-up question is this. So those who is taking the public transit to those remote parking lots, and who is just driving to those remote? What's the percentage there? Most people just driving to the remote parking lots?
As far as Orlando, Orange County Transit, there's a couple of buses that go to the Disney campus, but they tend to be oriented around kind of rush hour times. So I think we can assume that most people will drive to one of the satellite lots and then mode shift. At Disneyland in California, which is much older and has a much smaller property, pretty much everybody parks in a remote lot, but some of those lots are walkable to the campus. They run like little shuttle vans around, but for the most part, if you're relatively healthy and able-bodied, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. There's a couple of questions I want to get to in the chat. Let's see. Bet they don't have a tram car. Nope, they do at the parking lot. Absolutely. A trained person who loves Disney. Yeah, welcome to Transportation Camp. Okay. Will Brightline provide a similar free ride from the airport to Disney Springs? Probably not. The way it looks now is that they're going to charge people for that, but it's not going to be a lot. It's going to be a couple of dollars, which is great for Brightline. I think will do wonders for their bottom line. I don't think the freeness of Magical Express is what drives the traffic. I think it's the convenience above everything else, that it'll just take you directly to your destination. They used to have a service where they pick up your luggage and deliver it to your hotel, but they're phasing that out because that seems very logistically complex. Brightline, how do I get a job doing Disney Transit? Same way you get any job at Disney World. They have a job board and you look around for opportunities. I will say that they are my #1 with a bullet super duper dream client. I can't imagine anything better than getting paid to work on, improving the Disney Transit system. But we'll see. I'm working on it. We'll see what happens. I've got various angles to approach it. But yeah, let's open up the floor. Any questions, concerns, fears?
I just put one in. I actually was part of the press school that covered the injured teams for injured veterans in 2016, and it was at the ESPN Wide World of Sports complex, which I had never been to before. And I was really impressed with that as a complex of sports activities and how organized it is there. How is that complex related to the rest of Disney?
It's a little bit separate. It tends to be the kind of place like your local high school sports teams will go for events and championships and those sorts of things. So it's on campus, but a little segregated in terms of the core of the transportation system. And I think that's related. Go ahead.
I actually rented a car for 10 days because I was going to Tampa too. and I Airbnb'd 12 minutes from the park, and I was doing like a 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. day, so I was in a safe, like, middle class area, but I wasn't really there other than to sleep. And the transportation in was very simple in the car, and the parking at the ESPN Center was simple. So I was just wondering, I didn't know anything about the ESPN Center. I had been to the Disney complex before. We actually stayed as a family when I was in middle school in the campsite, and I went back to see the site as an adult. And I had been there as an adult like about 15 years ago. But I just couldn't get a sense of how it was related to the general theme park, other than that it's run by them and it's owned by them. They were so supportive of those games and the veterans. It was a great place for basically a Paralympian sort of event.
Is Disney looking at autonomous vehicles? So, Jackie, they already have autonomous vehicles. What do you think you're sitting in when you go in the dark rides? They are the leader in autonomous vehicles globally. They probably have more in their fleet than anyone else right now. Whether that's going to translate to kind of outside service, I think, they're actively looking at the minivans program and kind of how that on-demand service has been working for guests. I would expect them to subcontract it out to another provider since they already have this relationship. I would think that if Lyft eventually transitions to autonomous vehicles, they would kind of piggyback on that. But in a lot of ways, they're looking more at kind of bulk resources, kind of thinking about, like, the one of the reasons they went to a gondola system is that expanding the monorails is insanely expensive, and they just have tremendous maintenance costs. It's just not like a real future-proof technology. So they're looking at kind of circulating people through the whole campus. There's a comment here about from Christoph, which is a good observation, that Disney built the people mover at Houston Airport. Walt himself was really super interested in new forms of transportation and was utterly convinced that kind of people mover technology was going to be like the slamma-jamma of the 21st century. Very large influence on the 1964 World's Fair, which is actually where It's a Small World comes from, and also one of my favorite rides, which is the Carousel of Progress, and they have an amazing song there. It's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow by the Sherman Brothers. But next to it is what used to be called the Wedway People Mover, which is basically a moving bench that goes through Tomorrowland, which is great for parents. But again, has this kind of induction motor technology that just I need to move people all around. So Walt was interesting because he was a huge steam train fan. He had like a huge train built in his backyard, and that's why every Disney park has a train going around the perimeter, because Walt loved trains. But I think he also was very cognizant that like trains in the late 20th century were on their way out as a transportation option, but still had like a lot of practicality. And so that's how you get stuff like the monorails, which also was originally, the Disneyland monorail is not a transportation system, it's a ride. The Disney World monorail is an actual transportation sign. And then will the Brightline route be electrified with third? I have no idea. That's for the Brightline presentation. That's I think that's easily Googleable. But the Brightline expansion is in progress right now.
Yeah, I just tried looking it up. My company has Brightline expansion, catenary design, but I wasn't sure if that portion for Disney will be electrified via third rail. I'm not sure what's electrified with that.
I think it might be unlikely because it's more expensive build, and Disney's utilities are a little weird because everything runs through Reedy Creek. So technically, they have their own everything when it comes to utilities. And what's really interesting is that there's no limits on their ability to build. If they want to build a nuclear reactor, like it's a done deal, they can kind of just slap it together. They have their own power plants for the whole complex. And so it's a question on from where would the Brightline draw power actually becomes interesting as it transits through the Reedy Creek property. But go ahead.
Are they pretty self-sufficient on everything? Even like, do they grow food? Like, they seem really self-sufficient.
There is an Epcot pavilion where there's some food grown, and they do use it on campus, but the amount of guests that show up, there's no way in Central Florida you have like croplands it's Cisco comes in and delivers hamburgers, but there
Yeah,
are
I did notice that.
some small demonstration projects to kind of keep that vibe of the city of the future alive. But for the most part,
Florida heat is tough.
yeah.
They do have
Jerome puts a terrific link to a channel that all of you should look at on YouTube if you're called Defunct Land, about kind of Disney history and parks if you want to learn more about Epcot. And then there's a question from Mark saying, do you think Disney will merge their cast member and their guest? My educated guess is no way, because a very important part of the Disney experience is what they call good show, which is that they believe that what the public sees is you're on stage, and therefore you should preserve the illusion that everything works flawlessly and you should not see the guts of the operation. Whereas cast members are what they call backstage, meaning that kind of anything goes. Like, you do what you got to do to make sure you present good show. Disney World does offer some behind-the-scenes tours where they kind of take you through the underground tunnels and let you see stuff. Those are for, like, adult Disney fanatics and other aficionados. They're not for, like, families with small children. It's going to be an operation where they may improve cast member services, but I seriously doubt, based on kind of the corporate ethos, that they would ever merge those two services.
I know a cast member that actually got written up for utilizing the visitor transportation system.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, because they should not see you commuting back and forth to work. You should just magically vanish at the end of the day and not be seen by them. So whether you agree with that ethos or not, that's how the company does its jam.
That's why they call it the Magical Kingdom.
Yeah, like it's really a very strong commitment to a certain aesthetic. But I think what's more interesting, though, is that when guests fly to Disney World, even if they're from like rural Arkansas or whatever, they just accept that they're going to use transit. And this came up in another discussion earlier today. This idea that there's certain circumstances where people who may otherwise be really resistant to transit. And the example we were talking about was at the airport, you get on like the Her City Eva shuttle. I've never seen anyone go, no, I'm not going to do that. I need to, take a taxi to the rental car place. Every business person just grabs their suitcase and says, okay, I'm on the rental car shuttle now. And then they go and rent their car to do whatever to go downtown. So I'm wondering what the magic is, what kind of voodoo they're using on people, where they just accept, I'm just going to ride a bus for a week, and that's going to be cool, and I'm going to love it. And they don't do much to the buses. I mean, they slap a Mickey Mouse sticker on it, and there's some USB ports, but it's nothing more exotic than you would see on a SEPTA bus or a Ramada bus. It really isn't. But people are eagerly handing over $100 bills every day to do this. And I think there's really a lesson for kind of the transit world to think about. Customer perception is not the same everywhere. And it's not just about customer experience, because this is not advertised as like a thrill ride. It's literally, we have a bus that'll take you from your hotel to the park and back. You don't have to worry about driving. And they don't serve alcohol at the Magic Kingdom, so it's not a drunk driving issue. They do at Epcot, but it's not like a drunk driving issue. It's not one of the usual reasons that drives people to transit as an alternative to their cars.
Don't you think it's a question of their brand being about trust? And like Mickey Mouse is asking you to do that. Like, there's a lot of brand there. There's a lot of trustworthy brand. That
could be one answer. But I don't know how much trust, Enterprise Rent-A-Car has. I don't know if I would let them watch my kids.
I know, but Disney's asking you to, it's like a package.
Disney's special in a lot of ways, but I think it's still a big corporation, and it's still, you get off the plane and you're in a strange state, and then you get on the bus, and then you go to the hotel, and then you get on the other bus to take you to the ferry, to take you to the train. Most cities would kill for that level of intermodality, and they did it in a Florida swamp in 1972. So I think there's something really interesting going on here, and there's not a ton of scholarship about it, which is always that's my jam. If there's something esoteric, and a lot of people are doing it, and nobody's formally studied it, that's like a big flashing red alarm for me.
They're just really organized. That's what I like about them.
So are you suggesting that we could try and apply the Disney model to like a downtown area. I mean, in my mind, probably part of why Disney has such high ridership is because you don't have another option inside the park. Maybe not true between, you know, your hotel and the park, but within the park, you can't drive your car in.
You can absolutely drive, but you got to pay for it. So they have 3 tiers of hotels, kind of beginner, middle, and really fancy. At the really fancy level, they're charging parking fees on par with parking in Midtown Manhattan. They're charging you $40 a day.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are some cities who have done kind of downtown pedestrian malls and transit malls with varying degrees of success, right? Like Buffalo, not so much. Denver, quite a bit better. And, you know, Seattle, yeah, they've done a great job. I think what the magic, I think if you focus on the fact that it's entertaining, where they're at a theme park, I think that's the wrong angle to look at. What I'm more interested in is what's the decision-making process for, you're already spending a tremendous premium to go to this place in the first.
Mm-hmm.
Why? What's the deal breaker with, oh, now I'm paying like for parking? Where that's enough incentive to get people to not do it, because, you know, Midtown Manhattan, they're still charging $40-50 a day for parking, and people still do it. They're still driving in. And that's the last place you should ever want to drive. There's a million options to get to Midtown, by train, by taxi, by bus, by whatever. So I think really they know the answer. They're not sharing it with people. But I think if you're a big A&E firm, if you're a transit agency, I think the real question is, what's the psychology that lets, you know, middle income or upper income Americans suddenly abandon all their car first principles with nary any resistance? And what's special about this that's not entertainment based? And I think, you know, being in the DC area, there's a lot of circulator buses that go around the National Mall, and it's kind of the same principle, right? Like, you don't want to drive. I mean, lots of people drive down to the mall. There is some parking. It's all pay parking. But for the most part, everyone's real happy to take the metro or the circulator bus down there. There's something about these gathering spaces, and I think that's how I characterize it, that people are willing to kind
I wonder also if it's travel time competitiveness. If this bus is going from point A to point B with no intermediate stops, then it should take the same amount of time if you were to drive, which is not the case with the transit system serving a city that needs to make multiple stops, serving multiple origins and destinations.
It's funny, that need word, there's a lot of have-tos, I think, in the transit world. I think about a lot this week, where I think, from my perspective in kind of the on-demand world, when I talk to fixed route people all the time, I hear a lot of have-tos. It has to make lots of stops. No, it doesn't. You know, it has to be the same fare as regular bus. No, it doesn't. We can kind of create any system we want as long as we all do what we want to do. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to kind of look beyond a lot of the inherited wisdom. You know, and it could be something simple, like there's been a big movement in the last, let's say, 10 years. Instead of paying at the front of the bus, you just switch to proof of payment. And you just board on all doors. Like, all doors boarding used to be this revolutionary idea, and now it's basically like, why aren't you doing it? That used to be a have-to, right? Free transit in a lot of places. Where I was an undergrad, I was in Western Massachusetts, and there were 5 colleges, and there's bus routes that run for free between all the colleges. You don't need a car to go there. Urban/rural. I think Disney doesn't have any have-tos because it's their property and their buses and their money. And I think they approach the problem differently by saying, okay, I got 50 million people I need to move. How do I move them efficiently and make sure that they get to where they're going so they can continue to give me money? And I don't think transit agencies necessarily look at the problem the same way by saying, you know, I think it's the idea that, like, well, anybody can go anywhere, so I need to have a system that can kind of take everybody anywhere, instead of looking at it more as, where are my big attractors, and how can I make sure that those big attractors, like, you never need a car to go there? Would that reduce general VMT more than kind of a grid system? I think those are open questions that can be modeled.
Dave, how many of the people are getting to the airports using public transport before they get to the Orlando airport? Probably 100%, right? So really, this isn't
really depending on where they live. You know, from Little Rock, none. From New York City, some. From the DC area, if they're coming from National, a ton. I don't think that's part of the equation because they have no control over that. And I think most cities that aren't New York have some kind of rail to their airports. I mean, even New York, JFK has excellent rail coverage. It's LaGuardia that's the basket case. But here in D.C., if I'm going to National, I almost always take the Metro. Silver Line's opening to Dulles basically next year. I'll stop driving there soon as well. I don't think that's a large factor. But what's interesting to me is there's a comment here from Christoph that Disney Transit is easy to understand. I just want to highlight that Disney does not issue maps. There are no Disney maps. That's a fan map. They do not hand you a map. They do not post maps. Basically, when you get to your hotel, there's a bus bay, and each bay is labeled. This goes to the Magic Kingdom. This goes to Epcot. This goes to Disney Springs. This goes to Animal Kingdom. And that's it. They do not assist you in figuring out how to go from hotel to hotel. They want you to go back and forth to the theme park and back and forth to the downtown area. It's easy to figure out once you figure out it's a hub and spoke like that. And they do give you real-time information and things like that. But it's kind of amazing to me that there's a system that's basically one of the largest in the country, and there's no official map and there's no official timetable. They basically just show up and get on it.
But if you've been there, you know it works.
Lots of people know it works. I don't know if Cleveland's ready to go to no map, no schedules. I don't think that's the right answer. I think it's the other way that Disney maybe should think about map and what that map would look like. But I think it challenges a lot of the assumptions we have about urban transit because the volume of passengers is so big that you can't say this is just some like weird one-off theme park system.
I think
they're doing better than Austin.
David,
go
ahead.
Go ahead. I'll be polite. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think Christoph Spieler made another really good point that a lot of people voted up too. Like the clientele that is riding Disney Transit is controlled, and people aren't worried about safety necessarily, or encountering poor people or black people, or I mean, we're just trying to be really blunt here, but that is a kind of fantasy reality that is in the Disney parks that does not exist on real transit when we're dealing with people from all walks of life, and I wonder how that must, I would have to imagine that plays into people's perceptions that maybe have never been on transit before, and they trust riding transit in Disney because they're not having to worry about some of the issues we may face on our urban transit systems.
Jerome, how big a factor in Indianapolis was it when people said that they don't want to ride transit? It's because of, I don't want to encounter someone who doesn't look like me, or I don't want to encounter someone who's poorer than me, versus it doesn't go where I want to go, or it's not frequent enough. Did you ever have surveys or?
Yeah, I don't think we have any. It's more of an anecdotal thing. I don't know if we have any research into that. What I can say in Indianapolis, we had a lot of people when we opened the Red Line BRT that they would ride that, but they wouldn't get on any of the local buses. Even if it went directly to where they were going, or was more convenient for them, but they had no problem taking the extra journey to get on the BRT since it was premium service, I guess. But and you definitely saw a difference in the demographics of who was riding BRT versus the local buses. So,
no, I think you're right. It's definitely that Disney feels like a safe space for a lot of people. But I think given that factor, it's still interesting to kind of look at operationally. They're just moving a ton of people around.
Sure, and I think you're right. But they make it so easy.
And I think.
David, my questions are more operational. So how many employees do you think they have? What do you think their operating budget is on an annual basis? And
operating budget is as good as mine. In the millions, certainly, for the Florida operation. I don't think it's in the billions. It is interesting to note that of all the Walt Disney Company arms, that theme parks is by far their greatest cash driver outside of COVID times. Like before COVID, it's basically they make a ton of money from the theme parks, and they make some money from the movies, a ton more money from merchandising. Operationally, there's a couple of thousand operators who are actually driving the buses and trains, and I would assume that they have dispatchers, probably people with some kind of algorithms to kind of figure that out. I don't think it's going to be operationally that differently than any large city bus system, except that they probably can do changes to operations much more quickly because it's entirely proprietary.
The thing is that there.
Thank you.
I wonder if there's a relationship around safety for sure. I think I agree with Jerome, but I also think what's impressive about them operationally that's related to transit is once you get off the transportation vehicle that takes you from the hotel to the theme park or from the theme park to the hotel, and when you're in the theme park and you're facing long lines, they can move lines. They can move people by feet as well as by transit and vehicle. So to me, that creates a sense of safety too. That the whole experience is based on the fact that they know how to move people, not just into and out of a vehicle, but in a line.
Yeah, I want to address Faye's comment here on the chat because I think it's very interesting about the intent to travel. It's leisure travel versus day-to-day commuting. I would say if you look at guest patterns at Disney properties, most of them kind of go in at the beginning of the day when park opens and they stay till park close. In essence, it is a commute. They're not slaving away at the desk or anything, and they're not in a coal mine. They're riding roller coasters all day. But I think they definitely have rush hours with lower demand during midday. The midday travelers tends to be people with small children taking them back to the hotel for a nap.
Right.
And the transit system kind of wakes up an hour or two before park opening, and then it closes down an hour or two after park end. So it's very oriented towards, and Christoph's earlier point had as well, that yes, the goal of the transportation is to keep you on Disney property and keep you spending with Disney and not tempted to go somewhere else off campus for dinner or for entertainment or anything else. On the other hand, if you're a city, you probably want that tax revenue to stay in the city, right? And I don't know if I've ever heard of a city designing their transit system to kind of keep you in the city and spending money in the city, not going somewhere else and giving them the tax revenue. That's a weird concept, right? But maybe we could do something like that. What if kind of city transit systems dumped you in places where the city itself benefited from revenue? And maybe not everybody needs to get steered that way, but maybe your high-income suburban commuters should be dumped into a mall so you can get the tax revenue from that. Those are interesting questions.
But we do that in the city. Like the Reading Terminal is a really good example of that at the Civic Center, the new Civic Center, and how 30th Street Station's been developed, and it's going to continue to be developed. Are good examples of that.
Yeah, I think rail hubs have been doing that since the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
See, Jackie has an interesting question as well. Do they attempt to synchronize their transit headways with the lines forming at attractions? Not lines at individual attractions, although they do keep data on that. It's more for park opening and close. So they know that if the park's opening at 8, a ton of people are getting onto the bus between 7:30 and 8 to try and do what they call line drop. That's park opening. So they are aware of the patterns of where passengers go. But I don't think it's timed for a particular ride. The exception being that at close of day they do like fireworks shows and other special events, or they may do like a special spectacle. They do orient transit around those, but those are predictable and controlled by the companies. So they know. Oh, the fireworks are at 9. That means everyone's going to disperse around 9:15 to 9:30. Let's start lining up the buses now and making sure that people can get back to their hotels. And they do have some slack in the system to kind of dispatch more buses at least to kind of pick people.
Another challenge I would envision in trying to apply a similar model to a downtown area would be related to deliveries. I imagine that at Disney it's one entity, so those deliveries are probably very consolidated, but that won't be the case when you have several different businesses, several different entities co-located.
Mm.
absolutely. And I've had to deal with this issue in New York City, which is particularly bad. Everything arrives by truck, and there's a big limitation on street space. Part of that will be a lot of those deliveries will switch to drones over the next 10 to 20 years. We'll probably consolidate because you can have multiple vendors, but if they all use the same drone delivery vendor or use the same technology, then that can be kind of put together in kind of more of a train model than the individualized, atomized delivery now. But yeah, I mean, it's great if you can.
Yeah, I think I've similarly heard of like cargo delivery for the last portion. You know, you can have a larger truck come to the outside of downtown and then have a cargo bike or these sidewalk robots or something like that.
Yeah. I actually live where the sidewalk robots are now. It's not that far from me, and they're a little weird. When you first see them, you're like, what the hell is that thing? And they have little flags, and they're very polite. Like if they see a human trying to cross their path, they'll just freeze. They want you to cross first. They don't want to get in your way. But I'm thinking more kind of larger drones. If only some kind of like rich guy would invent a cheap way to tunnel under cities that would run drone deliveries through. That would be awesome. If anybody's heard of this, should let me know. But all joking aside, I think as we shift to more efficient cargo deliveries, it just frees up a lot of space for humans and kind of figure out smarter ways to kind of consolidate them as well. I think everybody's been tapped out. It's the end of the day. I appreciate everyone coming to this and listening to me rant about Disney World for 45 minutes.
Well, I was going to give you a 2-minute warning. So.
A 2-minute warning. Okay, well, two free minutes, any topic. Here we go. The lightning round.
My whole impression of the 7 days of coverage of the Invictus Games was if every park planner for sports in small and big cities had the resources that Disney had for that Epcot Center, it would just be such great development for kids because parks are just terrific when they're invested in and work so smoothly.
Yeah, I don't know if my local parks need a monorail, but
no, but the point is that there were 7 or 8 playing fields of different sports going on with 18 nations of injured soldiers with no problems, and I kept saying to myself, it's such a good model.
Again, thank you all for coming, and great to see familiar faces and some new folks from this transportation camp. I will see those of you who are going to the next one. I never miss them. And thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Greatly appreciate your participation. Thanks, Dave, for putting this presentation together.
Thanks for coming. We're going to have the afternoon gathering. So if you are able to head on over to GatherTown, we're going to hang out in the afternoon hangout, talk with one another, connect. And thank you all, obviously, for coming and helping make Transportation Camp Philadelphia 2021 a big success as always. And we look forward to seeing you also at the summer gathering and in person next year, hopefully. Although we said it last year, but I have a good feeling we'll be in person next year as well.
Yeah, but I wasn't vaccinated last year, so...
there you go.
Big difference. All right.
Big
Thanks,
difference.
everybody.
Stay safe, everyone.
Take care, everyone. See you there.
Bye-bye.